Hi. Hi. How's everybody out there? Hope you're well. Hope you're enjoying this sunshiny spring day. I hope it's sunshiny where you are. It's definitely sunshiny on Block Island. Fidgeting, I know, my daily fidget here on the screen. That might work. I don't know. Welcome to Frankenstein Tea, a daily short story program for adult listeners. It is a time for you to check in with the Island Free Library, for us to check in with you, and for you to check in on yourself. How you doing today? How you feeling today? How's your mental health today? How's your physical health today? What's on your mind? Are you listening to this with your eyes closed, taking a break, getting ready for an afternoon nap? 3:00. It's such a nap time in America, isn't it? Such a, we limp through this hour at this office, at this work. Yeek. We would definitely be napping if we could. I think that's, the siesta is not so far off base. I think everyone's biorhythm needs a 3:00 siesta. Well, I'm not having a siesta. Perhaps you are. Perhaps you're doing a chore. Perhaps you're just listening. Perhaps I know I have a friend out there. I don't think she's out there today. She's away for a little bit, but sometimes she's knitting through this. So all and any of that is great. I'm going to apologize because yesterday I did an introduction and got ready to read a story, and I think I read the first line, and the internet crapped out. So we're going to try again today. Let's see if I can get through this story without the internet crapping out. I think I froze on the screen, and then I deleted it from Facebook and deleted it from, I don't even know if I deleted it from YouTube, but it's going to be a second shot at yesterday's story, which is in celebration of Asian American Month. And it is a story by Gish Jen. It is, I read this yesterday. I will read it again. This is what Gish Jen's editor says about Gish. My belief was that Asian American women writers had something uniquely their own to share, something that might teach us what it was like to live in a country which always views one as an outsider, oftentimes as an exotic outsider. At the same time, I believed that those writers were women who shared so many issues with their sisters of all colors that common threads would be found which would weave us together. Jen's editor, Carol Bruchak, wrote that. And I wonder if that's the kids' author, Bruchak's something or other, sister, brother, wife, mother, I don't know. Bruchak. All right, well, I'm going to go with this story. And I'm going to try to go with this story. As I said, I tried yesterday and it crapped out just as I started to read. But I'm going to read it again today, and I'm going to get through it. I'm confident about that. So here we go. This is Gish Jen in the American Society. Part 1, His Own Society. When my father took over the pancake house, it was to send my little sister Mona and me to college. We were only in junior high at the time, but my father believed in getting a jump on things. Those Americans always saying it, he told us, smart guys thinking in advance. My mother elaborated, explaining that business took bringing up like children. That businesses took bringing up like children. They could take years to get going, she said. Years. In this case, though, we got rich right away. At 2 months, we were breaking even. And at 4, those same hotcakes that could barely withstand the weight of butter and syrup were supporting our family with ease. My mother bought a station wagon with air conditioning. My father, an oversized red vinyl recliner for the back room. And as time went on and the business continued to thrive, my father started to talk about his grandfather and the village he had reigned over in China. Things my father had never talked about when he worked for other people. He told us about the bags of rice his family would give out to the poor at New Year's, and about the people who came to beg on their hands and knees for his grandfather to intercede for the more wayward of their relatives. Like that godfather in the movie, he would tell us as his feet up, he distributed paychecks. Sometimes an employee would get 2 green envelopes instead of 1, which meant that Jimmy needed a tooth pulled, say, or that Tiffany's husband was in the clinker again. It's nothing, nothing, he would insist, sinking back into his chair. Who else is going to take care of you people? My mother would mostly just sigh about it. Your father thinks this is China, she would say, and then she would go back to her mending. Once in a while, though, when my father had given away a particularly large sum, she would exclaim, outraged, but this here is the U.S. of A. This apparently having been what she used to tell immigrant stockboys when they came in late. She didn't work at the supermarket anymore, but she had made it to the rank of manager before she left. And this had given her not only new words and phrases, but new ideas about herself and about America, and about what was what in general. She had opinions, now, on how downtown should be zoned. She could pump her own gas and check her own oil. And for all she used to chide Mona and me for being copycats, she herself was now interested in espadrilles and wallpaper, and most recently, the Town Country Club. So join already, said Mona, flicking a fly off her knee. My mother enumerated the problems as she sliced up a quarter round of watermelon. There was the cost. There was the waiting list. There was the fact that no one in our family played either tennis or golf. So what? Said Mona. It would be a waste, said my mother. Me and Callie can swim in the pool. Plus, you need that recommendation letter from a member. Come on, said Mona. Annie's mom write you a letter in a sec. My mother's knife glinted in the early summer sun. I spread some more newspaper on the picnic table. Plus, you have to eat there twice a month. You know what that means. My mother cut another enormous slice of fruit. No, I don't know what that means, said Mona. It means Dad would have to wear a jacket, dummy, I said. Oh, said Mona, clasping her hand to her breast. Oh. We all laughed. My father had no use for nice clothes and would wear only 10-year-old shirts with grease-spotted pants to show how little he cared what anyone thought. Your father doesn't believe in joining the American society, said my mother. He wants to have his own society. So go to dinner without him. Mona shot her seeds out in long arcs over the lawn. Who cares what he thinks? But of course, we all did care, and knew my mother could not simply up and do as she pleased. For in my father's mind, a family owed its head a degree of loyalty that left no room for dissent. To embrace what he embraced was to love, and to embrace something else was to betray him. He demanded a similar sort of loyalty of his workers, whom he treated more like servants than employees. Not in the beginning, of course. In the beginning, all he wanted was for them to keep on doing what they used to do, and to that end, he concentrated mostly on leaving them alone. As the months passed, though, he expected more and more of them, with the result that for all his largesse, he began to have trouble keeping help. The cooks and busboys complained that he asked them to fix radiators and trim hedges, not only at the restaurant, but at our house. The waitresses that he sent them on errands and made them chauffeur him around. Our head waitress, Gertrude, claimed that he once even asked her to scratch his back. "It's not just the blacks don't believe in slavery," she said when she quit. My father never quite registered her complaint, though, nor those of the others who left, even after Eleanor quit, then Tiffany, then Gerald and Jimmy, and even his best cook, Eureka Andy, for whom he had bought new glasses. He remained mostly convinced that the fault lay with them. "All they understand is that assembly line," he lamented. "Robots, they are. They want to be robots." There were occasions when the clear running truth seemed to Eddie, when he would pinch the vinyl of his chair up into little peaks and wonder if he was doing things right. But with time, he would always smooth the peaks back down. And when business started to slide in the spring, he kept on like a horse in his ways. By the summer, our dish boy was overwhelmed with scraping. It was no longer just the hash browns that people were leaving for trash, and the service was as bad as the food. The waitresses served up French pancakes instead of German, apple juice instead of orange, spilt things on laps, on coats. On the 4th of July, some greenhorn sent an entire side of fries slalomeling down a lady's massive central. Slaloming down a lady's massive central. Meanwhile, in the back room, my father labored through articles on the economy. "What is housing starts?" he puzzled. "What is GNP?" Mona and I did what we could, filling in as busgirls and bookkeepers, and, one afternoon, stuffing the comments box that hung by the cashier's desk. That was Mona's idea. We rustled up a variety of pens and pencils, checked boxes for an hour, smeared the cards up with coffee and grease, and waited. It took a few days for my father to notice that the box was full, and he didn't say anything about it for a few days more. Finally, though, he started to complain of fatigue, and then he began to complain that the staff was not what it could be. We encouraged him in this, pointing out, for instance, how many dishes got chipped. But in the end, all that happened was that, for the first time since we took over the restaurant, my father got it into his head to fire someone. Skip, a skinny busboy who was saving up for a sports car, said nothing as my father mumbled on about the price of dishes. My father's hand shook as he wrote out the severance check, and he spent the rest of the day napping in his chair once it was over. As it was going on midsummer, Skip wasn't easy to replace. We hung a sign in the window and advertised in the paper, but no one called the first week, and the person who called the second didn't show up for his interview. The third week, my father phoned Skip to see if he would come back, but a friend of his had already sold him a Corvette for cheap. Finally, a Chinese guy named Booker turned up. He couldn't have been more than 30 and was wearing a light-hearted seersucker suit, but he looked as though life had pinned him. His eyes were bloodshot and his chest sunken, and the muscles of his neck seemed to strain with the effort of holding his head up. In a single dry breath, he told us that he had never bussed tables but was willing to learn, and that he was on the lam from the deportation authorities. "I do not want to lie to you," he kept saying. He had come to the United States on a student visa, had run out of money, and was now in a bind. He was loath to go back to Taiwan, as it happened. He looked up at this point to be sure my father wasn't pro-KMT. But all he had was a phony Social Security card and a willingness to absorb all blame should anything untoward come to pass. "I do not think, anyway, that it is against law to hire me, only to be me," he said, smiling faintly. Anyone else would have examined him on this, but my father conceived of laws as speed bumps rather than curbs. He wiped the counter with his sleeve and told Booker to report the next morning. "I will be good worker," said Booker. "Good," said my father. "Anything you want me to do, I will do." My father nodded. Booker seemed to sink into himself for a moment. "Thank you," he said finally. "I appreciate your help. I am very, very appreciate for everything." He reached out to shake my father's hand. My father looked at him. "Did you eat today?" he asked in Mandarin. Booker pulled at the hem of his jacket. "Sit down," said my father. "Please, have a seat." My father didn't tell my mother about Booker, and my mother didn't tell my father about the country club. She would never have applied except that Mona, while over at Annie's, had let it drop that our mother wanted to join. Mrs. Lardner came by the very next day. "Why, I'd be honored and delighted to write you people a letter," she said. Her skirt billowed around her. "Thank you so much," said my mother, "but it's too much trouble for you. And also, my husband is—" "Oh, it's no trouble at all. No trouble at all, I tell you." She leaned forward so that her chest freckles showed. "I know just how it is. It's a secret, of course, but my natural father was Jewish. Can you see it? Just look at my skin." "My husband," said my mother. "I'd be honored and delighted," said Mrs. Lardner with a little wave of her hands. "Just honored and delighted." Mona was triumphant. "See, Mom," she said, waltzing around the kitchen when Mrs. Lardner left. "What did I tell you? I'm just honored and delighted, just honored and delighted." She waved her hands in the air. The Chinese have a saying," said my mother. "To do nothing is better than to overdo. You mean well, but you tell me now what will happen." "I'll talk Dad into it," said Mona, still waltzing. "Or I bet Callie can. He'll do anything Callie says." "I can try anyway," I said. "Did you hear what I said?" said my mother. Mona bumped into the broom closet. "You're not going to talk anything. You've already made enough trouble." She started on the dishes with a clatter. Mona poked diffidently at a mop. I sponged off the counter. "Anyway," I ventured, "I bet our name will never even come up." "That's if we're lucky," said my mother. "There's all these people waiting," I said. "Good," she said. She started on a pot. I looked over at Mona, who was still cowering in the broom closet. "In fact, there's some black families been waiting so long they're going to sue," I said. My mother turned off the water. "Where'd you hear that?" "Patty told me." She turned the water back on, started to wash a dish, then put it back down and shut the faucet. "I'm sorry," said Mona. "Forget it," said my mother. "Just forget it." Booker turned out to be a model worker whose boundless gratitude translated into a willingness to do anything. As he also learned quickly, he soon knew not only how to bus, but how to cook, and how to wait table, and how to keep the books. He fixed the walk-in door so that it stayed shut, reupholstered the torn seats in the dining room, and devised a system for tracking inventory. The only stone in the rice was that he tended to be sickly. But reliable even in illness, he would always send a friend to take his place. In this way, we got to know Ronald, Lynn, Dirk, and Cedric, all of whom, like Booker, had problems with their legal status and were anxious to please. They weren't all as capable as Booker, though, with the exception of Cedric, whom my father often hired even when Booker was well. A round wag of a man who called Mona and me shoo-hoo, skinny monkeys. He was a professed non-smoker who was nevertheless always begging drags off other people's cigarettes. This last habit drove our head cook, Fernando, crazy, especially since, when refused to hit, Cedric would occasionally snitch one. Winking impishly at Mona and me, he would steal up to an ashtray, take a quick puff, and then break out laughing so that the smoke came rolling out of his mouth in a great incriminatory cloud. Fernando accused him of stealing fresh cigarettes too, even whole packs. "Why else do you think he's weaseling around in the back of the store all the time?" he said. His face was blotchy with anger. "The man is a frigging thief." Other members of the staff supported him in this contention and joined in on Operation Identification, which involved numbering and initialing their cigarettes, even though what they seemed to fear for wasn't so much their cigarettes as their jobs. Then one of the cooks quit, and rather than promote someone, my father hired Cedric for the position. Rumors flew that he was taking only half the normal salary, that Alex had been pressured to resign, and that my father was looking for a position with which to placate Booker, who had been bypassed because of his health. The result was that Fernando categorically refused to work with Cedric. "The only way I'll cook with that piece of slime," he said, shaking his huge tattooed fist, "is if it's his ass frying on the grill." My father cajoled and cajoled to no avail, and in the end was simply forced to put them on different schedules. The next week, Fernando got caught stealing a carton of minute steaks. My father would not tell even Mona and me how he knew to be standing by the back door when Fernando was on his way out. But everyone suspected Booker. Everyone but Fernando, that is, who was sure Cedric had been the tip-off. My father held a staff meeting in which he tried to reassure everyone that Alex had left on his own and that he had no intention of firing anyone. But though he was careful not to mention Fernando, everyone was so amazed that he was being allowed to stay that Fernando was incensed nonetheless. "Don't you all be putting your bug eyes on me," he said. "He's the frigging crook." He grabbed Cedric by the collar. Cedric raised an eyebrow. "Cook, you mean," he said. At this, Fernando punched Cedric in the mouth, and the words he had just uttered notwithstanding, my father fired him on the spot. With everything that was happening, Mona and I were ready to be getting out of the restaurant. It was almost time. The days were still stuffy with summer, but our window shade had started flapping in the evening as if gearing up to go out. That year, the breezes were full of salt, as they sometimes were when they came in from the east, and they blew anchors and docks through my mind like so many tumbleweeds, filling my dreams with wherries and lobsters and grainy-faced men who squinted day in and day out at the sky. It was time for a change. You could feel it. And yet the pancake house was the same as ever. The day before school started, my father came home with bad news. "Fernando called police," he said, wiping his hand on his pant leg. My mother naturally wanted to know what police, and so, with much coughing and hawing, the long story began, the latest installment of which had the police calling immigration and immigration sending an investigator. My mother sat stiff as whalebone as my father described how the man summarily refused lunch on the house and how my father had admitted under pressure that he knew there were things about his workers. So now what happens? My father didn't know. Booker and Cedric went with him to the jail, he said. But me, here I am. He laughed uncomfortably. The next day, my father posted bail for his boys and waited apprehensively for something to happen. The day after that, he waited again, and the day after that, he called our neighbor's law student son, who suggested my father call the immigration department under an alias. My father took his advice, and it was thus that he discovered that Booker was right. It was illegal for aliens to work, but it wasn't to hire them. In the happy interval that ensued, my father apologized to my mother, who in turn confessed about the country club, for which my father had no choice but to forgive her. Then he turned his attention back to his boys. My mother didn't see that there was anything to do. I like to talking to the judge, said my father. This is not China, said my mother. I'm only talking to him. I'm not give him money unless he wants it. You're going to land up in jail. So what else should I do? My father threw up his hands. Those are my boys. Your boys, exploded my mother. What about your family? What about your wife? My father took a long sip of tea. You know, he said finally, in the war, my father sent our cook to the soldiers to use. He always said it. The province comes before the town. The town comes before the family. A restaurant is not a town, said my mother. My father sipped at his tea again. You know, when I first come to the United States, I also had to hide and seek with those deportation guys. If people did not help me, I am not here today. My mother scrutinized her hem. After a minute, I volunteered that before seeing a judge, he might try a lawyer. He turned. Since when did you become so afraid, like your mother? I started to say that it wasn't a matter of fear, but he cut me off. What I need today, he said, is a son. My father and I spent the better part of the next day standing in lines at the immigration office. He did not get to speak to a judge, but with much persistence, he managed to speak to a judge's clerk, who tried to persuade him that it was not her place to extend him advice. My father, though, shamelessly plied her with compliments and offers of free pancakes until she finally conceded that she personally doubted anything would happen to either Cedric or Booker. Especially if they're needed workers, she said, rubbing at the red marks her glasses left on her nose. She yawned. Have you thought about sponsoring them to become permanent residents? Could he do that? My father was overjoyed. And what if he saw to it right away? Would she perhaps put in a good word with the judge? She yawned again, her nostrils flaring. Don't worry, she said. They'll get a fair hearing. My father returned jubilant. Booker and Cedric hailed him as their savior, their Buddha incarnate. He was like a father to them, they said, and laughing and clapping, they made him tell the story over and over, sorting over the details like jewels. And how old was the assistant judge? And what did she say? That evening, my father tipped the paperboy $1 and bought a pot of mums for my mother, who suffered them to be placed on the dining room table. The next night, he took us all out to dinner. Then on Saturday, Mona found a letter on my father's chair at the restaurant. Dear Mr. Chang, you are the Grat boss, but we do not like to trial, so we'll running away now. Please to excuse us. People saying the law in America is fears like dragon. Here is only $140. We hope someday we can pay back the rest bail. You will getting interest as you deserving. So great a boss you are. Thank you for everything. In next life, you will be burned in rich family with no more pancakes. Yours truly, Booker and Cedric. In the weeks that followed, my father went to the pancake house for crisis. but otherwise hung around our house, fiddling idly with the sump pump and boiler in an effort, he said, to get ready for winter. It was though he had gone into retirement, except that instead of moving south, he had moved to the basement. He even took to showering my mother with little attentions and to calling her old girl. When we finally heard that the club had entertained all the applications it could for the year, he was so sympathetic that he seemed more disappointed than my mother. Part 2. In the American Society. Mrs. Lardner tempered the bad news with an invitation to a bon voyage bash she was throwing for a friend of hers who was going to Greece for 6 months. Do come, she urged. You'll meet everyone, and then, if things open up in the spring, she waved her hands. My mother wondered if it would be appropriate to show up at a party for someone they didn't know, but the honest truth was that this was an annual affair. If it's not Greece, it's Antibes, sighed Mrs. Lardner. We really just do it because his wife left him and his daughter doesn't speak to him, and poor Jeremy just feels so unloved. She also invited Mona and me to the goings-on as demi-guests to keep Annie out of the champagne. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but before I could say anything, she had already thanked us for so generously agreeing to honor her with our presence. A pair of little princesses you are, she told us. A pair of princesses. The party was that Sunday. On Saturday, my mother took my father out shopping for a suit. As it was the end of September, she insisted that he buy a worsted rather than a seersucker, even though it was only 10 rather than 50% off. My father protested that it was as hot out as ever, which was true. A thick Indian summer had cozied murderously up to us, but to no avail. Summer clothes, said my mother, were not properly worn after Labor Day. The suit was unfortunately as extravagant in length as it was in price, which posed an additional quandary since the tailor wouldn't be in until Monday. The salesgirl, though, found a way of tacking it up temporarily. Maybe this suit not fit me, fretted my father. Just don't take your jacket off, said the salesgirl. He gave her a tip before they left, but when he got home, refused to remove the price tag. I liked to asking the tailor about the size, he insisted. You mean you're going to wear it and then return it? Mona rolled her eyes. I didn't say I'm return it, said my father stiffly. I like to asking the tailor, that's all. The party started off swimmingly, except that most people were wearing Bermudas or wrap skirts. Still, my parents carried on, sharing with great feeling the complaints about the heat. Of course, my father tried to eat a cracker full of shallots and burnt himself in an attempt to help Mr. Lardner turn the coals of the barbecue. But on the whole, he seemed to be doing all right. Not nearly so well as my mother, though, who had accepted an entire cupful of Mrs. Lardner's magic punch and seemed indeed to be under some spell. As Mona and Annie skirmished over whether some boy in their class inhaled when he smoked, I watched my mother take off her shoes, laughing and laughing as a man with a beard regaled her with Navy stories by the pool. Apparently, he had been stationed in the Orient and remembered a few words of Chinese, which made my mother laugh still more. My father excused himself to go to the men's room, then drifted back and dropped anchor at the hors d'oeuvres table, while my mother sailed on to a group of women who tinkled at length over the clarity of her complexion. I dug out a book I had brought. Just when I'd cracked the spine, though, Mrs. Lardner came by to bewail her shortage of servers. Her caterers were criminals, I agreed. And the next thing I knew, I was handing out bits of marine life, making the rounds as amicably as I could. Here you go, Dad, I said when I got to the hors d'oeuvre table. Everything is fine, he said. I hesitated to leave him alone, but then the man with the beard zeroed in on him, and though he talked of nothing but my mother, I thought it would be okay to get back to work. Just that moment, though, Jeremy Brothers lurched our way, an empty, albeit corked wine bottle in hand. He was a slim, well-proportioned man with a Roman nose and small eyes and a nice manly jaw that he allowed to hang agape. "Hello," he said drunkenly. "Pleased to meet you." "Pleased to meeting you," said my father. "Right," said Jeremy. "Right. Listen, I have this bottle here, this most recalcitrant bottle. You see that it refuses to do my bidding. I bid it open sesame, please, and it does nothing." He pulled the cork out with his teeth, then turned the bottle upside down. My father nodded. "Would you have a word with it, please?" said Jeremy. The man with the beard excused himself. "Would you please have a goddamned word with it?" My father laughed uncomfortably. "Ah," Jeremy bowed a little. Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. You are not my man at all." He bowed again and started to leave, but then circled back. "Viticulture is not your forte. Yes, I can see that plainly. But may I trouble you on another matter? Forget that damned bottle." He threw it into the pool and winked at the people he splashed. "I have another matter. Do you speak Chinese?" My father said he did not, but Jeremy pulled out a handkerchief with some characters on it anyway, saying that his daughter had sent it from Hong Kong and that he thought the characters might have some secret message. "Long life," said my father. "But you haven't even looked at it yet." "I know what it says without looking." My father winked at me. "You do?" "Yes, I do." "You're making fun of me, aren't you?" "No, no, no," said my father, winking again. "Who are you anyway?" said Jeremy, his smile fading. My father shrugged. "Who are you?" My father shrugged again. Jeremy began to roar. "This is my party, and I've never seen you before in my life." My father backed up as Jeremy came toward him. "Who are you? Who are you?" Just as my father was going to step back into the pool, Mrs. Lardner came running up. Jeremy informed her that there was a man crashing his party. "Nonsense," said Mrs. Lardner. "This is Ralph Chang, who I invited extra especially so he could meet you." She straightened the collar of Jeremy's peach-colored polo shirt for him. "Yes, well, we've had a chance to chat," said Jeremy. She whispered in his ear. He mumbled something. She whispered something more. "I do apologize," he said finally. My father didn't say anything. "I do." Jeremy seemed genuinely contrite. "Doubtless you've seen drunks before, haven't you? You must have them in China." "Okay," said my father. As Mrs. Lardner glided off, Jeremy clapped his arm over my father's shoulders. "You know, I really am quite sorry. Quite sorry." My father nodded. "What can I do? How can I make it up to you?" "No, thank you." "No, tell me," wheedled Jeremy. "Tickets to casino night?" My father shook his head. "You don't gamble? Dinner at Bartholomew's?" My father shook his head again. "You don't eat?" Jeremy scratched his chin. "You know, my wife was like you. Old Annabelle could never let me make things up. Never, 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 never." My father wriggled out from under his arm. "How about your sports clothes? You are rather overdressed, you know. Excuse me for saying so, but here." He took off his polo shirt and folded it up. "You can have this with my most profound apologies." He ruffled his chest hairs with his free hand. "No, thank you," said my father. "No, take it. Accept my apologies." He thrust the shirt into my father's arms. "I'm so very sorry. Please try it on." Helplessly holding the shirt, my father searched the crowd for my mother. Here, I'll help you off with your coat. My father froze. Jeremy reached over and took his jacket off. Milton's $125 reduced to $112.50. He read. What a bargain! What a bargain! Please give it back, pleaded my father. Please. Now for your shirt, ordered Jeremy. Heads began to turn. Take off your shirt. I do not take orders like a servant, announced my father. Take off your shirt or I'm going to throw this jacket right into the pool. Just right into this little pool here. Jeremy held it over the water. Go ahead. $112.50, taunted Jeremy. 112. My father flung the polo shirt into the water with such force that part of it bounced back up into the air like a fluorescent fountain. Then it settled into a soft heap on top of the water. My mother hurried up. You're a sport, said Jeremy, suddenly breaking into a smile and slapping my father on the back. You're a sport. I like that. A man with spirit. That's what you are. A man with panache. Allow me to return to you your jacket. He handed it back to my father. Good value you got on that. Good value. My father hurled the coat into the pool, too. We're leaving, he said grimly. Leaving. Now, Ralphie, said Mrs. Lardner, bustling up, but my father was already stomping off. Get your sister, he told me. To my mother, get your shoes. That was great, Dad, said Mona as we walked down to the car. You were stupendous. Way to show 'em, I said. What? Said my father offhandedly. Although it was only just dark, we were in a gulch. Which made it hard to see anything except the gleam of his white shirt moving up the hill ahead of us. It was all my fault, began my mother. Forget it, said my father grandly. Then he said, the only trouble is I left those keys in my jacket pocket. Oh, no, said Mona. Oh, no is right, said my mother. So we'll walk home, I said. But how are we going to get into the house, said Mona. The noise of the party churned through the silence. Someone has to going back, said my father. Let's go to the pancake house first, suggested my mother. We can wait there until the party is finished and then call Mrs. Lardner. Having all agreed that that was a good plan, we started walking again. God, just think, said Mona, we're going to have to dive for them. My father stopped a moment. We waited. You girls are good swimmers, he said finally, not like me. Then his shirt started moving again, and we trooped up the hill after it into the dark. That was Gish Jen in the American Society, originally published in 1987. And I got to sign off because I was checking to make sure I was going with the internet and I'm about to die on my battery. So know that I'm going to die, but I'll say, I hope you enjoyed. That's a special celebration for Asian American Month. That was Gish Jen, 1987. What was it? In the American Society. All right. Have a great afternoon, Block Island and beyond. Stay well. Mask up. I think people are still wearing masks. Wear your mask. Get your shots. Eat your vegetables. You know, I've been hearing a lot about this idea of languishing. So, you know, take a break. Give your mental health a rest. Take care of your mental health. Take care of your physical health. Take care of your mental health. Be good to yourselves. I'll see you again tomorrow. Peace. Thanks for coming.